recording us. Okay, so this is the April 15th meeting of the Just Transition Subcommittee. We do not have a quorum for this meeting, so this is not an official meeting, but we are going to still meet informally and have discussion today, and we will still record and post this meeting. So with that, welcome everyone. I'm really excited about tonight's agenda actually, so we're going to dig into this conversation around public engagement with our consultants. Folks have the agenda. It was attached to the meeting invite. So I think as we've been doing, I just wanted to do a quick welcome oh wait, 1 second. Yes, I do have the right agenda. Okay, I was like, maybe I have the wrong agenda. No, there it is. Just do a quick check-in, go around, and I thought, oh, and there's Virginie. Excellent, great. Welcome, Virginie.
Hi.
And, I think we wanted to introduce ourselves we'll wait and have our consultants introduce themselves in just a moment. But for subcommittee members and staff, if we want to go around and introduce ourselves. And I think on this dreary day, I would love to have folks, if you're willing, to throw in sort of a sign of spring that you're celebrating. So I think that might be something to lift our spirits. So I'm Sarah Phillips. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the director of the Office of Economic Opportunity in the Department for Children and Families, and I'm one of four co-chairs for this subcommittee. And a big sign of spring for me, we have geese and ducks at my house and chickens, and they are laying eggs like crazy. We have so many eggs. That is like a huge seasonal sign for us. I wish that I had one to show you because a duck egg is like this big, and then a chicken egg is like this big, or a goose egg, and it's just really fun with my kids. So that's my sign of spring I'm celebrating. And I'll tag the next person in that. Iris, I'll tag you.
Hi, I'm Iris Chung. I'm a student at Essex High School and a student activist, and also, am I officially a council member now? Yeah, okay. I'm officially a member on the Climate Council as well now. My sign of spring is, I don't know if everyone knows this, but like shower loofahs grow like cucumbers, and so I'm planting some this year, and they're beginning to sprout. So that's my sign of spring. If I'm supposed to tell someone, I'll call on Danielle.
Hello, I'm Danielle Bombardier. I'm representative from the Vermont AFL-CIO, the State Labor Federation. And let's see, sign of spring, I got my raised beds built in the backyard. So getting ready to start my garden. And I'll pass to Kelly.
Hello, I'm Kelly Klein. I am a member of the council as a representative of the small business community. I own Grenfell Meadery and Havoc Mead in St. Albans, Vermont. And I'm also a member of the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee, so I act as liaison between this one and that. And let's see, sign of spring. So we've been watching the birds, and Sarah, that you mentioned geese. We might be getting geese, so glad to hear your kids like them, because my daughter says they're her favorite bird. So a friend of ours has some eggs that haven't hatched yet. Maybe we'll be having a bunch of geese this summer. And let's see, I think, Virginie, you're next.
Hi, I am Virginie Diombu. I am the Racial Equity Director with CVOEO. And sign of spring, I am redoing my fence using trees. So I hope it's going to be looking nice. So I'm going to pass it to Amanda.
Hello, my name is Amanda Carlson, and I'm staffing the subcommittee. I work at Capstone Community Action, and a sign of spring that I'm enjoying is this rain, which will bring May flowers. My tulips in my garden were looking very dry and sad, so happy to have some rain. I'll pass that to Beverly.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. A sign of spring. My name is Beverly Little Thunder, and I'm the founder of Kunsike Tamakoche, which is land in Vermont. And my sign of spring is that I'm starting to see birds return. And I've seen a lot of cardinals. And that's always, when I see lots of cardinals, I know spring is coming. And I watched 2 bald eagles mating the other day. So the birds are telling me that spring is here. And so, who has not spoken yet?
Got Ross or Jane or David?
I'll pass it to Jane.
Thanks, Beverly. Jane Lazorchak, Director of the Global Warming Solutions Act. And I was going to tell you that every room in my house has daffodils cut in a mason jar right now, which I'm loving. But I also tell you that all day, Beverly, I've watched on my rainy deck a male cardinal, just picking at like a cracker that one of my kids left out there, which has been bringing me joy while I've been sitting in all the meetings that you all bring me joy too for. But it was really nice to see the bright red birds out there in the rain. So I'll pass to David.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Plum, and I am helping to facilitate the work of the Vermont Climate Council and the subcommittees. And so I'm a resource for this subcommittee. Signs of spring, I was just walking my daughter home from school, and we stopped just to marvel at a flowering tree. And I'm not even sure exactly what kind of tree it is, but it has these beautiful pink little flowers, and it's just marvelous. My daughter stood there for a while looking at it, which was a lot of fun. Ross, I think you're the final person.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Ross McDonald. I'm a staff member for your committee, and I'm the Public Transit Program Manager at the Agency of Transportation. For us and the family, we have 5 cord of wood that looks like a big bus of dimensions that we need to really start stacking before the mosquitoes come out. So that does mean spring around Peacham.
Great. I think I actually see Liz and Abby. So Liz, how about you next?
Sure, I can go. Hi, everyone. My name is Liz. I'm an AmeriCorps member serving with the Eco AmeriCorps program, which is out of the Department of Environmental Conservation. So I'm here as a staff person. And the biggest sign of spring I've noticed was the other day came out and there was pollen all over my car. And so that was a big sign that A, spring is coming, and B, I need to buy some Claritin. So I'm excited though. It's worth the runny nose.
Okay, I may be the last staff. I'm Abby Willard from the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets as support staff to the Just Transition Subcommittee. I just moved my office upstairs in our house from where I've been downstairs for most of the year. And I look out the window and see a pear tree up against our house that's just starting to bloom, and the bees before the rain were super busy pollinating it. So that's been kind of fun to watch and know that yes, spring is indeed here.
Thanks, Abby. Such a great note to move forward with. Thanks, everyone. So I think our next item on the agenda is to review and approve our agenda, and then also the minutes. And so in the spirit of consensus, I will assume those are approved unless someone speaks up and wants to discuss them or has adjustments to be made. Yes, Kelly.
If we don't have a quorum, can we approve the?
No, we can't.
We're close, but I think
You're close if Sue comes on.
Okay, so we'll come back to that. But is there otherwise sort of consensus on moving forward with this agenda, even if it's an official meeting? Okay, great. Thanks, Kelly.
Hello? Hello,
Hi.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Hi, sorry. I'm driving and I'm only able to do the audio version. My name is Kashka Orlo. This is I'm here to represent the low income sector. This is my first time meeting with everyone here, and I kind of jumped in, I think, in the middle here. So forgive me if I didn't hear. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. Sorry. So I wasn't sure if I heard everybody's responses, and I think that was what I read in the minutes. It had to do with the spring, the coming of spring, and what we see as you know, what was happening. But I just wanted to introduce myself and say that I'm here, and I'm just looking forward to actually meeting everybody in person, hopefully at some point.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm so glad you jumped in. I wasn't sure if you were in the meeting yet. So, and maybe say your name one more time because there was a little lacked clarity with the audio. It's Kashka Orlo?
Yes, that is correct. It's Kashka Orlo.
Great. Kashka, we are so glad to welcome you here today. So I think based on, I'll just remind folks, based on our last meeting, we had discussed the goal to replace who had been our representative on the subcommittee representing folks with lived experience of being low-income Vermonters. And so, Kashka, so glad to have you here joining us, and your past experience on the Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity Head Start Policy Council, and I believe also on their board, if I remember right. I think really glad to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Great. And I think, Jane, in terms of process, to be officially approved to be on the subcommittee, she's going to be approved by the steering committee. Is that correct?
That happened today, so she's all set. With that, you have 7 folks here, so you have a quorum. So
fantastic. And now we have Sue. So, okay, are we accepting the minutes? Great. Wonderful. Here we are, 4:19. We're only 4 minutes behind. I want to turn it over to the public engagement conversation and to our consultants, who I believe are going to sort of, I'm just going to hand it over to you. You're going to do a little, if I think this is right, do a little bit of a presentation on sort of your approach, and then we're just going to have a conversation today around public engagement. We have been eagerly awaiting for you to join our subcommittee, so I'm so glad to welcome all of you. So I'll let you introduce yourself. Yeah, if I might, Kara, let me just tee you guys up for 1 second and just, I just wanted to welcome Climate Access to the conversation with all of you. I'll allow them to each introduce themselves, but both the director and the deputy director are with us, and there may be some other folks here too today. But we're looking forward to bringing them into the conversation. I know that last week you all started to have the conversation around public engagement. I've teed up Kara and her team today to present to you all the proposal that they put forward, thinking about the public engagement work that they'd like to do on behalf and in service to the Climate Council. And I think it's really just the start of a conversation with all of you to help inform and shape their work going forward. So I'm really excited that they're here today. Happy to turn it over to them to introduce themselves and orient you to the work that they've put forward. So thanks so much for making the time.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I'm Kara Pike with Climate Access. It's really nice to join all of you today, and we're very excited to be selected to be your partners in this work. I'll have my colleague Meredith from Climate Access introduce herself, as well as Sarika Tandon from Rise Consulting, who we're partnering with on this effort and really excited to work with. So I think just to sort of share a little bit about what we want to talk about today, we'll introduce ourselves, and then I'll turn it over to Sarika to introduce our overall approach for the public engagement work. And then I'll walk through the steps that we'll be taking, and then Meredith will finish us up with what are some of the next stages that we need to be thinking about in terms of our work together. I'm joining you all from Vancouver Island, British Columbia. Climate Access is based in the US, but I'm based here. I'm a dual citizen, and I'm on the unceded and traditional territories of the Cowichan people. And I'm the founder of Climate Access. We've been around for about 14 years now, and our focus is on advancing climate solutions through impactful and equitable climate communications and engagement approaches. We have a learning network of almost 4,000 practitioners from across different levels of government, nonprofits, community organizations, faith groups, health institutions, etc., academics, that we run a resource and training hub for. We work on engagement and activation with different levels of government. And we also do a lot of strategic framing work. So how do you have the climate conversation? My background is a mix of environmental science and communications. And before I turn it over to Meredith, a sign of spring here is I'm starting to transplant strawberry plants into new raised beds that my son made for me. So Meredith.
Great, thanks, Kara. My name is Meredith Herr. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm located in the Santa Cruz Mountains in California. And I've been working with Kara for a long time on climate communications and engagement. Kind of spring for me is kind of continuing with the bird theme. I've been hearing from a lot of folks. We have a quail family in our yard. So we've been watching the quail parents and the little chicks run around, and our kids have been enjoying that. So yeah, that's been our spring sign. And Sarika, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you so much, Meredith. Hello, everybody. My name is Sarika Tandon. I'm the principal at Rise Consulting. The emphasis of my work is the intersection of race, equity, and environmental issues. I'm calling in from Montpelier, Vermont, on the unceded lands of the Abenaki people, and really excited to be partnering with all of you and Climate Access on this. Oh, sign of spring, I put the snow pants away. I took my kids' pants and the winter coats and I put them in the basement, and it felt really good.
Great, thank you so much. So with that, I think we'll have Meredith share her screen, and then Sarika will kick us off.
You're on mute, Meredith, I think.
Oh, sorry, just troubleshooting sharing my screen. So if you want to get started, Sarika, and I'll pop it up when I can. Maybe I'll share the link with everyone.
Sure. So I'm going to jump right into our approach because I think Kara did a good job giving you an overview of our presentation. So I wanted to highlight some of the key components of our approach. And the first one is co-creation. And by that, we mean creating a process that invites the community members in and supports their ability to contribute to the assessment of risks and opportunities and determining strategies to prioritize. And co-creation builds buy-in in the most sort of authentic way. It's not about coming up with an agenda and then getting people to agree to it, but coming up with an agenda together that people feel invested in because it comes from their thinking as well. On the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about our approach around equity, which is really centered in accessibility, respect, and reciprocal engagement. So we want to include communities that have rich lived experience, that have historically and systemically been left out of state planning processes. And this includes BIPOC communities, low-income communities, youth, LGBTQIA populations, people with disabilities, and other communities facing disproportionate climate impacts. I think we might be on slide 5 now. I'll just wait a moment as we pull that up. So, perfect, yeah. We're there, thank you. So some of the practices that we'll be using in the approach is evidence-based approaches, including polling, factoring public opinion trends and social science, and connecting climate change to what is relevant in people's lives. So as we all know, climate change is a very complex issue, and offering multiple pathways for engagement helps people to get involved through storytelling, visual communications, community events and deliberative dialogues, stakeholder surveys and interviews. Again, we want to create different ways for people to engage and contribute to decision making. And the last point I want to make also is that we want to resource leaders in the community to contribute to outreach efforts, and that's a core part of the approach. So I'll pass it on to Kara to talk us through the phases of the project.
Okay, great, thank you. The co-creation process really starts at the outset in terms of how do we even design the public engagement process. And we really see that co-creation starting with the work that we'll be doing with you, the Just Transition Subcommittee, and our staff and the Climate Council facilitator. So we really want from the outset to be working with you to really have you help shape the different phases that we're going through, get your input on the products we're creating, and so on. In addition to really meeting with you quite regularly, as well as who I just mentioned, we also, in our discussion with Jane, flagged the need to make sure we're also checking in with the other 4 subcommittees as part of the process, as well as integrating this with what's happening with the Comprehensive Energy Plan team. We really want to think about starting to, and I like the fact that the RFP really pulled out the audience research piece, because what's so important is starting with understanding who we really need to connect with, including those who are most impacted by climate change, but who also may be least likely to engage in this kind of decision-making process. So we really want to think through who it is we need to reach, and then how do we best understand the way to engage them. So we have a few things outlined here. One is identifying different leaders from different sectors, different community organizations, and doing stakeholder interviews with them. And that's an area where we'll want your input on that list of who to include, as well as hosting roundtables with 20 representatives from BIPOC communities and 20 representatives from rural Vermont. So again, that's going to be really important to have your input on who should be part of those conversations. From that work we'll be doing, we'll be then summarizing what we learned from those conversations. Moving ahead to the next phase, we'll be checking in with you along the process, as you'll see, but we'll be using that information to develop a public engagement plan. As was mentioned at the outset, we'll also be looking at what are the public opinion trends? What do we already know from past work that's been done to engage Vermonters in climate change to shape that work? We'll be sharing a draft with you. We'll want to get your input on that. As part of that, we'll identify what are some of the key themes and messages that we want to be communicating through the process. And we have, as part of the plan, testing that via social media just to make sure we're on track. Designing a social media campaign, so we're really thinking about how to amplify just at the beginning, but throughout the process. Maybe I'll just press there. If someone could.
Yeah, mute if you're not.
Okay, great. And then we'll be putting together a set of materials to really support the process. And this will really be informed by the research and the plan that we've created. But things like banner ads for websites, materials for having public events, if we're able to meet in person again, dialogue guides for hosting online sessions, etc. Backgrounders on what the Vermont's goals are, what climate impacts are, and what some of the solutions are. So materials that will really help support the different phases of the outreach. And then really looking at what needs to be done to communicate this on the website. and working with the communications team at A&R to really make that happen. So moving ahead to the next piece, we'll then move into kicking off the public engagement process. So there'll be a launch. We'll want to have an announcement, media outreach, social media outreach, email marketing. And this is where I just want to go back to the co-creation process, because the interviews that we do at the outset, the people who we are inviting into those roundtables, if we engage them effectively at the outset as partners in a respectful way, in our experience, they get excited about the process and then really want to work with us throughout. So we'll really, for those who do want to continue to engage, return to them at key points along the process and have their help with that amplification through their own email marketing, social media, other channels that they have to engage with the stakeholders that they work with. We'll host an online event for the media and the public. And then we'll move into just more extended pieces. So we'll create a simple, sort of Survey Monkey online survey, advertise on the website, social media, make part of what we're sharing out and asking people to share. And that'll be a way to gauge both concerns, what people think the risks are, get ideas on what people think about the solutions being put forward, what people want to put forward as their own solutions into the process that perhaps haven't already been identified in the process. We also want to, we'll engage in a deep dive online dialogue and deliberation process and voting system, where we'll be able to take some of the ideas that are being considered in the planning process and really have people explore them. There's a platform we'll be using for this that's set up for engagement in decision making just like this. And we'll really be able to customize it to the needs of the Vermont project based on what we learn in the research and what we've outlined in the engagement plan. The stakeholder dialogues are really critical. We want to have a conversation. We want to hear from people as much as we want to tell people what we think is going on. What are the risks that they're seeing? What are the changes in their community? What do they think would work in their communities or their context? So those are going to be really important. We have it broken out in the proposal, as you saw, between online and, if possible, in person. And if we're not able to do in person, we would just add to the online there. So that dialogue process we've also found is really important for coming together around shared values, really breaking down what some of the, perhaps if there's some polarization or people have discomfort with the issue, whether or not they see themselves in this issue or see, their own peers and communities. So it's a really great way to get into that level of engagement. So the next phase 3 is when the draft plan is ready to be released, really supporting the launch of that. I won't go into, you can see the details there. And then we'll be working again with partners, ideally to distribute that and get input on the public comment period. One thing we've identified is time for our team to be able to support organizations who really want to have their own dialogue with their own stakeholders and do a deep dive around the draft plan, that we can support them in facilitating that, whether that's online or, again, if possible, in person. And then similarly around the release of the final plan. Similar way, but in this way, we'd also be doing things like hosting a press conference and echoing it out that way. Part of the co-creation process, not only with the partners who I was just talking about, but if we engage community stakeholders effectively in this, then we've created a platform for them being partners in implementation of the plan. And I think this is really important. This is an iterative process, and this is something that I know Jane's been thinking about too. you know, there's setting the plan, but then there's prioritizing the actions, getting buy-in for the policy change that needs to happen, but also people taking those steps in their own lives that actually really are needed to advance both the emission reduction goals that need to be achieved, but also increase resilience. So just to close out then, there will be an additional, there's hours set aside for our team to basically, once the plan is launched, to continue to support communications through the end, a few months out, and we'll take the last month, perhaps 6 weeks. We have to revise the timeline just because we're on a different start date than we'd anticipated. But we'll really take a step back and take a look at what we've learned from this process and evaluate the process overall. So we'll be collecting and analyzing what the different participation data that we've had throughout the process. We'll be creating a report on that, surveying some of the people who are involved with the stakeholder dialogues, for example. Host a debrief meeting with all of you to walk through that and do a final sort of assessment on things. I do want to mention, though, that we've identified a couple of key points that are really critical throughout to bring the feedback from what we're hearing from people into the process for just transitions, but the other subcommittees as well. So this first phase is critical with really getting to know each other, understanding more your work, objectives, etc. But then, you know, once we have that audience report, you know, come back again. What have we learned? What does this mean for where we're going with the public engagement? And then when we hear from people in that draft public comment period, to make sure we're really taking that input and weaving it back into the final plan. And this is critical, again, to the buy-in, because if we want people as partners in the implementation, when the plan actually reflects community values, concerns, needs, ideas, then it's much more likely we'll have those partnerships. So I'll just turn it over to, before we go to action steps, Sarika and Meredith, just if you want to add anything to what we've laid out there.
Nothing to add at this point. Thank you, Kara.
And perhaps we want to pause now and see if there are any questions or comments and just have a bit of a dialogue before we dive into next steps. So we'd welcome any questions on what we presented.
Sarah, you're muted. You're still muted.
Can anyone hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Sue.
This is Sue Minter, and I'm so sorry I am late because I've had a lot of technology problems, but I'm doing Teams from my phone, which sort of works. And I'm so pleased to be able to hear your presentation and so glad you're part of our team. I do have a number of questions. I guess mine focuses on two overall thoughts or inquiries, which is one, how you see our role. What is our role in an ongoing sense? Because that's sort of one of our paramount missions, is to help guide your work. And then the second really is knowing what you know about the Climate Action Plan and what has to go into it, and all of your great ideas. And I don't really know the timeline, but I'm wondering if you feel concerned about the timeline, because that's certainly something we're thinking a lot about and wondered your thoughts about. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, so we do want to revise the timeline and really get specific, the touch points at which we want to connect with you. There's some of that already outlined in the proposal. I guess the way we see see it as that you're kind of our core team, you know, along with Jane and the staff at ANRs and the Climate Council facilitator, that you're sort of our go-to, right? So if we need guidance on what we're doing, we'd come to you and ask first. You may direct us somewhere else, but we'd start there. Similarly, if we have a draft document, we would want to come back to you and say, here's where we're at, like here's the draft engagement plan. You know, we would like your input before this is finalized. So we really see it in that co-creation process. A couple of the immediate steps, really we need to start identifying people to ask to interview, as well as to include in the 2 roundtables. And so working with you on that list, I know Sarika has begun to draft one that we can share with you. But that's the kind of thing where we're really going to want to say, here's what we're thinking, what do you think? And then come back and finalize our direction. You know, I think we probably need to have a little bit more discussion on how we do work with the other subcommittees and just make sure that, you know, everything is really well connected in that regard. And then what was the second part of your question, Sue, again?
It was really your reflection on the overall timeline of this effort,
Yeah.
which many people are a little concerned about. So from your professional expertise, what do you see? Because you've got a lot of great activities that if you feel you can fit into the timeline in a meaningful way, that would be helpful to hear.
Yeah, I think the timeline is tight. We'd originally thought that that the deadline for putting out the draft was the December, not like putting it out earlier. So it felt a lot more comfortable when it was December. And I guess it's just in part, I think we need to better understand what your overall process is going to be, because in other projects that we've worked on, even when you get to a final plan, you may still have a whole prioritization process around what is going to take place in the first phase of your work, or what will be prioritized from a funding standpoint or whatnot. So I think, you know, us having a better understanding of what are the steps along the way in this process with all the committees and how it fits together is really going to help us better determine that. Yeah, so I think, you know, it's a matter of just adjusting some of the things based on where the absolute drop deadlines are that are not movable versus things that are. And then I think just we're already anticipating, knowing the October sort of draft release goal, that we're really going to have to move very quickly at the outset of the project and get as much going as possible. And I think, you know, so often things can get bogged down with just how long it can take for things to go through a process. Okay, this is the draft engagement guide, now it's final, right? And so I think the more we can sort out, and this goes back to the first part of your question, the more we can sort out how we're going to work together and make sure everyone's comfortable with the process, so we don't, it's clear and we get to a decision, everyone's comfortable, and we can move ahead relatively quickly. But Sarika, anything you want to add from your experience?
Yeah, just that sometimes speed and respectful public engagement can be in conflict with each other. And so to show that respect and relationality to the folks that we're reaching out to and that we're engaging in the process, wherever we can find those pockets of spaciousness, to do that really respectfully would be great. So if we can find more time, it would be put to good use.
Agreed. Folks, I'm going to try to help facilitate the meeting for Sarah, who I got a text from, she's having kiddo issues. So I'm seeing Jane. I hope I can do this from my phone. Jane, did you have your hand up?
I do, thanks.
Thank you.
I have a couple stream of conscious comments and thoughts that might help guide the rest of this conversation today also. So I just wanted to suggest or explain, which I haven't yet to this subcommittee, that we're thinking about the agenda for the full Climate Council, which I've invited Kara and team to join at on the 26th, that one of the substantive topics that we will take up at the Climate Council is public engagement. Similar to today's meeting, we will introduce the team at Climate Access and beyond and allow them the space to share what they're sharing with you. But my hope is that by the time we got to the April 26th Climate Council meeting, that the Just Transitions Committee will have had another meeting between now and then to have a little bit of back and forth to inform your thinking about how and what we can do with respect to public engagement, understanding the timeline that we're on to meet the December 1st deadline. That conversation will sort of be in service to tee up the council to discuss the draft outline for the climate action plan, which David and I have worked on together to put forward, trying to set the stage of what is required in this first plan and what can go beyond December 1st, and thinking about how we build the infrastructure to do that good work beyond December 1st. And I just want to suggest, that this is, I think, no secret to all of you, because we've talked about in this committee lately, there are a couple big things that sort of, like are hurdles for us to meet the December 1st deadline. A lot of it comes with the engagement, though, and the timeline around when the engagement needs to happen in order to have a final plan. And what we'll know when, and that lines up then with our technical analysis RFP, which has just been posted yesterday. We do not expect to have contractors on board till mid-May at the earliest, but likely end of May. And so sort of what we will know around pathways analysis, as well as particularly important economic analyses of policy choices. We won't have answers for June that are grounded in much analysis. And then we certainly won't have the economic analyses done for October likely. We'll probably be getting them in October. So the idea of how to inform engagement. And so my final comment on that is just, this is just my thinking lately has been around the timeline, that the December 1st date does feel really good for a draft plan, and that's well within the bounds of the council to accept and adopt, because it's the council's idea, a jurisdiction to approve the plan. And so I'm not suggesting, that's a done deal at all, but it's just, for me, what I've gotten to with respect to thinking about what I now understand with engagement, what I understand about when we'll have analyses and results, that December 1st is a really reasonable time to have a complete plan, albeit not gone out and informed then by the final engagement that would need to happen after that. So I just want to suggest that as sort of we're thinking about it. That said, if we stick with the October 1st draft date, really trying to refine what we'll know when and how we do thoughtful engagement, understanding the limitations of what we'll understand and know. And so I just want to put that forward, and then also wanted to surprise, you're like one of the substantive agenda items for the 26th Climate Council meeting, and start to tee up how that could be presented in the context of also framing up a conversation about what the outline for the climate action plan will look like.
Thank you, Jane. I want to invite other questions or comments from around the call.
Yeah, and thank you, Sue. I would just say, I think I'm back, and I think people can hear me now, and hopefully when the kids start walking in the room on the Teams call, it's just time to step away. So thanks folks, so sorry about that. Other comments, though, I think on this would be great. I think I see a hand up. Yeah, Kelly.
This is just something I don't know much about it, but a term that came up at the cross-sector mitigation committee earlier, and yes, they would love to talk with you. They have things they want to engage the public on. Deliberative polling. And it's not something I'm familiar with, and I have a note to go research it, but just wanted to put that out there, that was something that came up and several people seemed to think that was a really useful tool for public engagement.
Yeah, so the technical platform, can you remind me what the name is, Meredith, because I can never get it right. You're on mute.
I am mute.
It's called Othello, and it's a platform that was designed for this kind of engagement. And so basically you can really take the template that they have and customize it in whatever way works for you, but it sort of starts off with a story. So it'd be like a story of climate change in Vermont, and that's where you would get into sort of the adaptation side of this, right? And what's at risk and what are the choices we're facing. And then people could add in, what are they most concerned about, the risks, and share comments on how they think this would impact them. And then you go through what are the options for addressing mitigation and adaptation, right? And so you would look at what are the range of strategies that are being considered, and it's best if this isn't already like ones that are in the final plan, but like the big list, right? And I mean, we'll have to be sort of reasonable in terms of how much we put in it, but you put in this set of strategies, and then you could put in different factors that influence the ability or desire to actually use that as a priority. So you might consider the cost, for example, back to the cost analysis, and how does that sort of sway decision making. But you could really sort of inform that as you want. And then people can basically, from the set of strategies, put together their own climate action plan and see how they compare to, like, oh, on this strategy, I'm really for it, but other people in Vermont are less keen on it. So you can sort of see, like, where am I at in terms of this other thing. But ultimately, if people go through the whole process, they create their own climate action plan that then you're able to see, like, this is how this person would put together this strategy. But it gives people all the information to actually, think through it, gives them facts, but it does it in a really not overwhelming way. It's like a storytelling way. And then there's just different levels of polling. So there's stuff around demographics. So we would have a sense of, like, who's actually participating in that, and how does that affect, how you see the priorities come out in the climate action plans that are coming through. And you, of course, make it clear that this is an input to the process, right? But I think the other thing that it really creates is an opportunity for people to sort of be in your shoes and recognize these aren't easy choices, right, that have to be made. And that really helps people get, it's like that co-exploration. It's back to the co-exploration of the risks and co-creation of the solutions. If people really understand, oh, they're deliberating it themselves, the risks and opportunities themselves, it just gives them more empowerment and puts them in a better place to actually feel like, here, I can help make this decision. So it's being used in a lot of different communities in the US and Canada, and it's really gone up in use since COVID because you can't do typical, in-person public processes where you might have these kinds of deliberations. And just to distinguish this, we still have stakeholder dialogues that are online that would be via Zoom, that are conversational, not digital, right? And, it's really important we think about not creating a high bar with digital access. So if someone isn't comfortable with the Athelio process, they can join a Zoom conversation with real people and chat, or, if we're able to be in person and we could have, you all out and others like at a, a community fair talking about the climate action plan and it being relational, even better. So thinking about low tech, higher tech, and Sarika mentioned this at the outset, multiple points of entry into the conversation that's comfortable for people.
Great. And I see Amanda's hand and David's hand. And before David, I call on you. I just wanted to invite folks, our subcommittee members who haven't leaned in. I think, just even your initial reactions around the approach that they're laying out. And, we've done a lot of thinking as a subcommittee about public engagement and environmental justice and process. And we've been digging into that. And I'd love to hear from subcommittee members, just kind of in general, as you hear Kara and her team talk through this, is it what's ringing true for you, and what else is coming up for you just as initial reactions, rather than just diving into specific strategies. Even I think that could be helpful.
I just can I just interject? I have to actually facilitate a meeting at the top of the hour. Okay. So I just wanted to apologize for that, and my colleagues ideally can stay on with the conversation. Thank you.
Great. So with that, I don't know, David, if you had your hand up, if you wanted to.
I did, but I saw Beverly's hand. So Beverly, I'm happy to turn over to you first.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think that my first reaction was, here in Vermont, we have people that speak many different languages. And so is this outline that, that they're presenting, is it taking into consideration that we have whole pockets of community that don't engage in the ways in which they've outlined, and even if they did, it wasn't in their language, they might not understand it?
I think that's why the partner support piece is so critical, that we're supporting people with time, and we also have, partner stipends, time or money, to engage in their language with their communities. So that is definitely part of the strategy. And we can also definitely look to translating the collateral, and sometimes with the web tools it gets more difficult, but the basic collateral into different languages. And that typically is a practice that we have where we identify other dominant languages in a community and make sure that we're reaching out to leaders from those communities and providing the materials and tools in those languages.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
David, back to you. Oh, David, you're muted.
I thought I hit the little button. I was just going to say, it's great to meet you all. It's really wonderful to have you on board and have this capacity at the disposal of Climate Council and the subcommittee. I had two thoughts I want to share. One is, as Sarah mentioned, you all as a subcommittee have already put some ideas down on paper from our last conversation. And so they're there, and I hope those have been shared with the folks here from the consultant team, because you've already put some thought into this, and I'm sure there's more thought where you had. So let's not lose that, and we'll make sure that those notes get passed on. The second piece I wanted to mention is, I think it's helpful to separate out into early stage engagement that needs to happen sort of right now-ish in the coming months, where you don't have a specific thing you're sharing with people in terms of content and draft strategies. So it's a different logic, it's a different kind of engagement, it's a different kind of conversation, versus engagement where you're starting to have draft strategies coming out of the subcommittees, or maybe a full draft action plan or something. That's another kind of conversation. So I would think it would be helpful as you're doing this, and as the Just Transition Subcommittee is helping you do it, to think about those different kinds of conversations and what your strategies are for each, because they are fundamentally different in nature.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think early on, the initial interviews and roundtables are really going to center on giving audiences really an opportunity to share their concerns and how they would want to shape those plans. And so, yeah, starting with that broader conversation in the community around concerns or what people see as potential solutions and what they're, worried about in their own communities. So having that broader conversation to start, and then, as you said, as we get further along in the process, narrowing in on those specific points that are related directly to the draft. But I think that's a great point with how we're reaching out and communicating.
Great, thanks. Amanda, you had your hand raised for a little while now.
Hi there, thank you. Thank you for the public engagement team for being with us. Something that came to my mind when you were giving your presentation was thinking about the elderly population in Vermont and how we can engage that population, because they aren't generally the most tech savvy. That's a generalization, but yeah, thinking about that, because they do make up a big demographic portion of our state.
That's a great point, Amanda. Thank you. We'll be taking that, building that in.
Others before we, I think I see Liz's hand, and then we're gonna have to keep the conversation moving. I think we have a little bit of freed up time because Chris was not able to join us today, but Liz.
Sure, I'll be quick. I just wanted to quickly recognize the possibility that we may have already left some people behind, not intentionally, but just considering questions like, does the average typical Vermonter know about the Global Warming Solutions Act? Do they know that there is a Vermont Climate Council? Like gauging, that level of awareness of what's going on. The fact that there is an agenda or minutes that they can access on the state's website, let alone like join as a member of the public. To make a comment. So I just wanted to echo David's point on simply like broadcasting the basics and what's happening right now before we make too many decisions. So I know I brought it up a little bit last time, but I just want to keep emulating that idea of like, it's really important to not only bring people in when we are making some of the bigger decisions, but also just right now, and just maybe, and I don't know if that falls on climate access or if that falls on A&R, I don't know, but just a thought.
And this is Sue. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to echo and amplify that point, because while there's a bubble of people very excited about all of this, or even just a bubble of people thinking a lot about climate change, the vast majority of people aren't. And so how do we think now, before we have something to tell them what we want their opinions on, about even interesting them and giving them a base of education around what's happening in our climate in Vermont? What does the future look like? Why are we gathering opinion on this? So again, that's the early stuff, thinking about people we have left behind, but people who aren't really thinking about this, but we think we want to get involved. Thanks.
Yeah. So I think you guys had a couple more slides. Do you want me to share those again? You can finish walking through those. Would that be helpful?
Sure. Yeah, just for the last points there, it's really related to kind of what we're jumping into here, is that for the immediate first steps as we get into phase one of the project, is connect around these key audiences to really create an opportunity for folks to share their concerns, as I mentioned, and really play that key role in shaping and then ultimately implementing the plan further down the road. So we'd love to get your help in identifying who should be in the room, or the online room, as it might be. And so that's thinking about different key stakeholders, like folks from BIPOC communities or low-income individuals, youth, maybe LGBTQIA plus individuals, or people with health conditions or disabilities. As we mentioned, elderly or rural residents. Thinking about frontline communities, folks facing disproportionate impacts from climate change. So we put together a spreadsheet in Google Sheets, and the link is there on the screen, to kind of gather ideas around what stakeholders we should be including in the roundtables, and also the individuals who you think would be really important for us to start to interview.
Great. So I'll take that as an action step that you're asking us each, and we'll make sure as a follow-up to today's meeting that subcommittee members have this link, and you're asking us to go into that link and just name some key stakeholder groups to engage, and then I'm guessing also list potential individuals to interview, both in that spreadsheet.
That'd be great. Yeah. And I'll put my email in the chat here. So if there's questions as you pop into that spreadsheet, if things aren't clear, if you just want to check in about the process online, you can shoot me an email and I can be available for questions.
Great. Thank you.
Just a follow-up, Sarah. I'm not 100% sure how we use that Google Doc. And so I'll have to check with open meeting law. It seems like straightforward enough, or I'm not sure if I have to handle that for everybody. Just one more hurdle, but I'll check.
Okay, it seems like we should be able to use it and then just publish it at some point, right? So,
yes.
Okay, great.
Hi.
So,
yeah. Hi. Sorry to interject. So I'm on a cell phone, unfortunately, driving. So I'm unable to access some of this information, including the emails and the spreadsheet. Is there another way for me to access it once I'm in front of my computer? Or is it, is there a way for me to access all this information?
Yeah, absolutely, Kashka. We will send it up as follow up, and everything is posted on the website. But yeah, for sure.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, great question. Okay, so next on our agenda is actually public comment. This is a new process for us where we pause midway through the meeting and invite guests in the meeting to offer public comment. So,
wait, and sorry, one more thing before we transition. I just wanted to thank the Climate Access folks for being here, and then suggest that on Friday at the co-chair meeting that we consider how we think about the Climate Council meeting in a week and a half, and therefore think about how we engage with climate access iteratively between now and then, to sort of arrive at how this group will present public engagement and its role for the final climate action plan at the meeting on the 26th.
great, thanks, Jean.
Thank you.
So public. Yes, thank you. Yes, you're welcome to stay, of course, but you have other engagements today. So thank you for joining us. I really
thank you so much. Yeah.
So public comment, anyone?
Hi, this is Pat Sagri. Where's the video camera here?
Hi, Pat.
Hi. Hi. So the one thing that's sort of jumped out as, well, how do we do this, is the roundtable that it referred to maybe 20 people that's from rural Vermont. Well, federal definition, all of Vermont is rural Vermont. 200 of Vermont's 251 towns are less than 5,000 people. So if it's really about the issues of the land-based community, then maybe you think about it one way, or it's just, that seems really, it seems like that needs to be teased out a little more. If those 20 people are representing all of rural Vermont, is it anyone outside of Chittenden County and downtown Rutland? Or you see where I'm sort of getting with this, that it's a little.
Yeah, I think that's a point well taken. Thank you.
So I just wanted to, I just wanted to mention that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Other public comments? And Meredith, feel free to respond to Pat. I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to make sure I created space for other comments if you wanted to respond.
I think that's a really great point, and I think that's part of this, kind of what we're intending for the first part of this process with thinking about key stakeholders is, yeah, really trying to figure out who should be in the room. And obviously it's just 20 people could represent any, 20 people wouldn't even necessarily represent a small group, obviously. But just trying to get a representation in some way to hear from voices, especially from voices that may not typically have been involved in these processes historically in the past, and just including folks from a broad range of experiences. So I understand with, that definition of rural may need to be teased out, as you mentioned. That's a great point of thinking about what does that really mean? Are we, looking across different counties, who are we able to include to make sure those voices are at the table? But yeah, point well taken.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else today who wants to jump in with public comment before we move on? Okay. Great. So I will carry us forward on our agenda. And I think the next part on our agenda is to do sort of additional announcements and other subcommittee business. I don't actually, and then updates from Jane, other updates. So I don't actually have any business on my list to update people about. We've sort of been updating things along the way, but I'll invite Sue in case there's something I'm missing from the co-chairs that we need to update folks on.
Well, there is something I'd like to mention, and it may sort of, it relates to our other task, which isn't public engagement, but it's really about defining some of our guiding principles. We had a presentation with a number of folks from UVM and the Vermont Law School and others. And at Capstone, we have a couple of interns that Amanda and I have met with, and Bindu from UVM has sort of offered up one of her postdocs, and someone from the law school has offered up to help. So what we're doing is gathering a little support from that team to help start us on a road of developing these guiding principles. They're pulling together examples that we've seen, maybe even highlighting some that we really like. And I think our hope has been to present some of those ideas next week. And I didn't know, I wanted to ask, if that sounds good. I'm a little understanding, Jane, that we need to really dig in more on engagement as well in preparation for the next Climate Council meeting. But this can't wait because the other subcommittees are also waiting for us. So if you are interested in being a little more involved, we believe we need to do a little work in between meetings to move this along, and we're sort of starting that process. If you are interested in being a part of it, we invite you to do that. And I guess what I'd like you to do is email me and Jane if you are interested in that. And probably Amanda will follow up. Amanda, let me ask you if there was more. I think we were maybe even going to gather some reading materials possibly for next week. So be on the lookout for those. But Amanda, if there's more to the story, let me know. No, okay. So we will probably be sending you stuff to read. We invite you to join a small group to dig in, but if not, we will have some ideas to present to begin this discussion next week. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Sue. Yes, that's a very important update. So
Great. Jane, I think I'm going to turn it over to you if there's anything else that we've missed or that you want to provide updates around administrative or anything else.
I'll share with you all that the steering committee met today. The bulk of the agenda with the steering committee was discussion for the Climate Council meeting on the 26th. I alluded to the main agenda item was would be twofold around the public engagement and Just Transitions Committee role in managing that, but also thoughtful engagement with the other subcommittees. So that is one big component. The other big component will be presentation of a draft outline for the climate action plan and receiving input from folks around the table about how appropriate it seems and possible to complete by December 1st. And then the final agenda item was really around the role of the Climate Council over the next few months, recognizing that the meat of the work is happening at the subcommittees right now and how best to support that work. And originally, I'll just say, we had thought about shifting the Climate Council meetings to bi-weekly shorter meetings. But what we're now thinking about and the steering committee advised on is in the process roadmap, it was actually outlined that the steering committee would serve as a convener for co-chairs to provide a space for cross-pollination to occur. So rather than adding additional full council meetings with everybody around the table, our one idea now is actually to still have monthly council meetings, perhaps make those only 3 hours, not the full 4, and then have the steering committee actually meet bi-weekly as it does, have one meeting focused on the council agenda and one meeting focused on convening co-chairs of subcommittees. So stay tuned to the possibility of an additional meeting of co-chairs coming together to cross-pollinate. And I would suggest for this group, since there's 4 of you, perhaps there would be a way to sort of rotate who steps forward to meet those meetings if you're all feeling sort of tapped out with capacity right now. So just one idea, or you can obviously all join. So that was the substance there, and I'm really excited and hope that you are to sort of dive in and lead the conversation off kick the conversation off on the 26th around public engagement, and then invite Climate Access into that conversation to present to the full council. And I can't think of any other. I will just say that one minor update is that I now am the proud owner of a Zoom license. And after this week, we will be transitioning all subcommittee meetings to Zoom. And yes. I will. Yes. some people are really psyched about that. And so I will work with the co-chairs and you, Sarah, who sent out these invites. I will send out all the invites for the standing meetings to have those with the Zoom link as the facilitator.
Excellent. Thanks, Jean. I appreciate that, and appreciate your effort to keep us connected to the larger work of the council and subcommittees and keep us informed around that. So thank you. And so we have some time on our agenda now to make sure that we have time for folks who are participating in other subcommittees to bring some of that information and learning back to us all, right? Just to kind of continue to cross-fertilize a little bit. So I wanted to invite folks to do that, and maybe I'll just go subcommittee by subcommittee. So I'll start with cross-sector mitigation, and Kelly, I know you've been participating on that one. I'm not sure if anyone else has been listening in, but I'll turn it to you.
Thanks. So yes, we just met today. Cross-sector mitigation meets every other week. So and on Thursdays. So I have a busy Thursday every other week. Let's see. So the committee is looking at 4 different sort of categories of sectors: transportation, housing, which includes weatherization and heating and cooling, fuel, what kind of fuels and things like that people are using, what kind of equipment they're using for that, power in general, and then non-energy, which would include things like agriculture, and agriculture is probably the big one in that. There's another. So today we had some updates from these smaller working groups that are looking at those 4 different areas. So the two that we got today were transportation and housing. On the housing front, they were sort of just going through, here are some ideas of things that we're looking at. They've started to go down this process, but nothing's really set in stone, of course. Let's see. So they're talking about basically weatherization of homes and buildings in general. So not just homes, but commercial buildings, and fuel switching, getting people off of fossil fuels, getting people on low carbon emission fuels. One of the things that I was really pleased that they really are focusing a lot on, how can we bring in just transitions, and they would like some guidance. But they were already thinking about, what about the fact that landlords have basically no incentive to switch to a different heater, because the tenant is paying for the heat, and the landlord would be paying for the heater, and the tenant has no incentive to switch because it's going to stay with the building when they move to another apartment. So that they're aware that's going to be an issue that they want to look at. And then there was also some discussion of biofuels, which are an option, which might not necessarily involve just that, they can be lower carbon and not necessarily involve switching to different technology. So they're looking at those sorts of things. Then with transportation, again, fuel switching, let's get people towards electric or hybrid, and also looking at demand reduction. So trying to get it so people don't have to drive as much. They're also really looking at the just transitions angle and wanting to, really asking for guidance on that front from us. So yes, the sooner we can have some principles and things, that would be wonderful. And they're looking at a whole bunch of different options, a whole bunch of different things that they could focus on. And I think some of what we could help them with is helping to figure out how to prioritize things, because of course it'll be based on cost and effectiveness, but also, making sure that we're not negatively impacting certain populations.
Thanks, Kelly.
And then, getting more public engagement also, like what would help you switch to an electric car or a hybrid and things like that. That came up in the meeting as well. So, and I brought to them some of the things that we've been discussing about the trickiness around, a lot of people who are low income are just going to get a used car. Used cars are typically not electric. How do we deal with that? So I shared some of the things we've talked about the transportation sector over in cross sector.
Great, thanks, Kelly. Appreciate that. It's good to hear it. And a big takeaway for me and what you were saying is part of the work is going to be to prioritize strategies, right? And so doing that with an equity lens and a just transition lens is going to be key in how we help them do that. Anyone else from that committee? Or Kelly might be the only one at this point, but that's okay. All right, great. Then I'm going to move over to Ag and Ecosystems. I think that's what that other subcommittee is called. Who do we have from Ag and Ecosystems that's been attending that committee?
I sat in on the last meeting. I don't know who else did. Also, a big takeaway was that they are really looking for guidance for their working groups, just because they're really trying to get started on that work and want to center equity there, but haven't received guidance from us on that yet. They had a good conversation about the difference between what is net zero versus gross zero, and how you can't really actually ever take away your impact, which I thought was a good just transitions just thing to mention. And then the big thing was they were talking about ranking. They are putting together a ranking metric for their initiatives and just priorities and projects. And so they were have all these categories, and they're doing weighting for each category and these different questions. And so they haven't added one in yet that is on equity, and I think they were working on that, but also looking for guidance on that. So like the question there was also whether they should just so there are a bunch of categories and then subcategories and sub questions for each category so that they can have very, very like precise metrics that have weighting for each thing. And I think they're hoping to share that tool with other committees as well. So they were wondering whether it might be better to have equity woven into each category or have a separate equity and justice category. I can reach out to the co-chairs and see if we can just take a look at that tool as we have it, just because I think that would be a really good place for us to weigh in. Because if we're going to be turning anything into numbers, we need to make sure that we're making those numbers have the right value for what everything means. But yeah, I think that's basically my update.
Iris,
I don't know if that's
yeah, that sounds great. I think we should definitely get eyes on what they're thinking of building. It's easier to see something than it is to try and verbalize a tool like that. So thank you. Yeah, Abby, sorry, I didn't mean to, if you're still.
I didn't have anything to add. Iris did a great job talking about those conversations, and I hope to join her for the next few meetings.
Great. And then we have rural resilience. I don't know if anyone's been able to join the rural, I hope that's what the other subcommittee's called. Oof, I'm really testing myself tonight. Rural resilience, that's the other one, right, Jane? Okay, good.
I sat in on their meeting last week and would like to sit in on further meetings. And I honestly arrived to their meeting late, so I don't have a ton to report besides that they, like us, are trying to develop a mapping tool. And the mapping tool that they are looking at is focusing on areas that are prone to natural disasters. So I foresee a lot of overlap of that with people that we're looking to target and bring to the top as well, because so many people that need climate justice solutions are those in environmentally hazardous areas. So I foresee some overlap in that zone. And short update.
Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, and they don't have to be long updates, right? And you guys can think about like what rises to the top of the conversation to bring today or to our group. I think that was really helpful. Any questions or comments for folks? Reactions, reflections? Yeah, Danielle.
Well, I sat in on the science and data subcommittee meeting. I don't know if anyone else was there also, but they are also working on ranking and prioritization. As you put in the chat, they had like a whiteboard that they were using to identify what they need to, what statistics and data and science that they're looking for, what sources they need to identify to get that data, and the stakeholders involved in those conversations. So I was a little bit distracted in the meeting myself, but I was trying to pay attention. And then they went and were ranking which ones committee members thought were, at the top of the list. So that's my quick update from there.
Great, thank you. I didn't mean to forget science and data. Thanks for jumping in. Yes, Sue.
I just feel like really, for me, very helpful to hear these quick updates because I haven't had a thought about what everybody else is doing, and it really makes me feel a sense of urgency that our kind of principles really get inculcated. So, just the thought that they'd be having, equity and justice over in its own category as opposed to integrated into everything else is a fundamental way of thinking that I think we want to contribute, and even just the mapping in rural resilience, the importance of not just mapping vulnerability, but overlaying that demographic, economic, ethnic overlay, so we can see that intersection as a way to prioritize, groups that might be vulnerable from an economic and racial, ethnic standpoint, as well as from a climate. I don't know. So that's all. I'm finding this very interesting, and I'm sure, Jane, you must be going crazy thinking about all the different things going on, and yet the talk is still kind of siloed. But that's what went on for me. In addition, well, anyway, that's it for me right now. But it stimulated a lot of thinking. So thanks everybody for joining those meetings.
I agree that just hearing you all speak, like, reiterated for me, our participation in those subcommittees is going to help us stay really grounded in high impact. So thank you. It's all about impact. Well, it's not all about impact, but it's all about impact. Okay, so we're going to shift gears, and unfortunately, Chris couldn't be here. I saw some fabulous slides that Chris put together to share his personal story in the energy climate space. So I think we're going to postpone Chris presenting until the next meeting, and that just takes us right into our community listen. So we reached out to Iris, who graciously agreed to come and present around, I think, the youth voice, but also any other kind of communities, and to kind of share some of the concerns and some of the experience around climate and energy within the communities that she's representing on this subcommittee. So with that, I'm just going to invite us all to just take a breath and absorb and listen and reflect. And Iris, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm not sure that I have a full community listen that like fully represents youth voice as much as I would like, just because I haven't really gotten a chance to set up the frameworks to get youth voice in a way that I want to. But just as an update, so I'm the new youth member on the Climate Council, and I'm working with community partners to put together a network of young people across the state, just so that we can be in better communication, and so that I can get their input on just all these different issues, because there are people who care about it and who possibly have time, but I haven't gotten a really good chance to connect with them yet. So yeah, I can bring back those voices whenever, but I haven't put that together to the extent that I wanted to. Basically, just I'll share just some experiences of people I know who've been affected. Like, we all know that Vermont is just very, very white, and that's really, really clear just in the schools because I don't know the last time any of you were in a school, but just it is so very blatantly very, very white, and it creates a space honestly that's got a lot of culture backed up behind it that's like pretty based in white supremacy. And like the one thing I would like mention is just, I mean, I live in Essex, and so I'm sure it's different with every single school and every single area, but the people of color here are mostly immigrants and people who are adopted, and then there are some multi-generational families who have lived here. But just as a whole, that's mostly who it is. And like the families that have emigrated, I've like talked to a lot of them who immigrated because of the climate crisis, and so we know what it is like more than anyone else. Like there's this family that goes to my school who moved here from a Pacific island, and their island was literally sinking. They were the island was just this. It's a very shallow, like it's very small as it is, and then the rising sea levels and the storms were literally sinking the island. And they moved here, and they haven't really gotten much of a chance to go back because their home was sinking. And so they clearly understand it so much more, and people of color are clearly just so much more affected because of these social issues that lead to this, because their island was not contributing like nearly at all to the climate crisis, and yet it is almost underwater now. So that's super real. And then a lot of the people I know who moved here, like I couldn't exactly tell you that it's a systemic, I mean, I know it's a systemic problem that people of color are like more disproportionately living like in places that experience flooding, but just anecdotally, my friends who are people of color are the people who have had their houses flood. and like it's not necessarily because they all live in the same neighborhood, and it's not because they're all low to moderate income. I don't exactly know why it is, but my friends of color are the people's houses who I've seen flood more than anyone else. And then I would also mention just that, like, I'm here to represent Youth Voice, but I'm really, really passionate about like the intersection of climate and race, because I think that sometimes youth movements, especially here in Vermont, but everywhere, center white climate voices a little bit too much, and they tend to have a sort of idea that to them that like the solution is going vegan or like being all like very living sustainably, which it is, but that is not an option for everyone, and people who are experiencing other hardships do not have that option. And I think that's really important to notice and talk about, because I think that the youth voice is in one way a monolith, in that we're all young and we all didn't contribute to this problem but are gonna have to deal with it. But it is not a monolith in that not everyone knows the same experiences and not everyone is fighting for exactly the same things. So I'll just bring that up. And then the other thing I would just bring up is that like I have a full understanding of how intertwined every single social issue is. Not everyone has that understanding, and that's pretty like that's ingrained in the system. It's not because we're not like teaching ourselves well enough, it's because we're not being taught that in school. Like I understand this because I learned it outside of the classroom, but the school system really has not done a good job of connecting those dots, and it hasn't done a good job of necessarily putting all those dots in front of students, because there's, at least in my education personally and in people I've talked to, the education goes, as at least for history, it goes up to like 10 years ago and then it stops. And so it creates this divide between the present and the past that like allows people to compartmentalize these issues. And like there's sometimes like a current events class or a current events discussion, but that's entirely separated from the history classes and the history discussions in a way that allows people to compartmentalize. And also the classes never like mention the intersection, because like we learn about slavery, not nearly as much as we should, but we learn about it in a way that doesn't even mention that like also slavery and the plantations were part of what led to the climate crisis, and like that mentality is part of what led to the climate crisis. And so like none of those things were ever really connected in school for me, and they weren't for other people my age. And like I think that education really is kind of a critical part of this, because if we're not teaching people my age to like understand this, we're not going to have a just transition, because honestly the workforce is going to be made up of people like who are my age and who have learned exactly what I've learned. And I mean also Vermont education is just sometimes outright flawed. Like there are some like legitimately racist parts of our curriculums that are just like also there, just to be like, it's not just the coded bias, and it's not just like the not necessarily connecting every dot. There's also some messed up parts of the curriculum. But I mean, yeah, I don't know if I have a ton else to say. I would just like, I think that education is a really, really vital part of this, and like just teaching kids about all of it, because I think that the fact that we've compartmentalized this is part of the reason why the youth climate movement tends to be so white-centered, because people just don't understand that the climate crisis is disproportionately affecting people of color, and people just don't make that connection in a way that they should. But I don't really think it's their fault. I think it's just that we haven't really been taught correctly. So yeah, I'm happy to talk about this for the whole, like, I can talk about this forever, but I don't want to take up too much time. If anyone has any questions about anything, I'm happy to answer them. And I definitely will bring back like periodic updates when I start getting more input from just a wider community of young people in Vermont. But yeah, think that's all.
Iris, that's so great. That was so great. Yes, thank you. I think, let me start by saying none of us should start with an apology when we start a community listen session. So that's my only feedback for you, Iris, because there was no apology needed for any of that. I think that was really great. And I really laud and appreciate your desire to bring more voices into the conversation than you felt like you had to today. But thank you. Other folks that want to chime in with reflections on or questions for Iris?
Yes, I want to go ahead. Thank you, Iris, for your presentation. Very valid, everything you said. And I want to add to it that education is very, very important. And here at CVOO, we have a head start as in Capstone. And I emphasize on the fact that we as educators, we really need to make everything in our power to really relay the correct message because we are in charge of the future. We are in charge of the new generation. So it is really important that we relay the message, the real message, the true message, and make sure that we normalize some languages. When I think about certain languages, certain languages and everything about race, to normalize that conversation. When I think about the refugee population coming here in this country, for those people who don't speak English, it is another layer of difficulties that they have to face. Some of these people have never experienced winter, for instance. Some of them were born in refugee camp. They relocated to the United States directly from the refugee camp, a rural refugee camp, to the United States. And in this country, as soon as they arrived, they were, after the 8 months of kind of support that the Refugee Resettlement Program provides, those individuals are put in the workforce. And life is hard. So they are so focused on sustaining basic lives that sometimes they don't even realize that there are issues that are out there that need to be taken care of, that they need even to be aware of. Issues of, installation for houses. A lot of them don't know that weatherization services are available, So that information needs to go out. We really need to do the outreach in the way that we use a plain language so that people understand. So our role is really to educate the population so that the information is known and understood, so that the people can take advantage of that information, of the resources that we have. So that's what I wanted to add.
Thanks, Virginie. Yeah, how you've sparked some good feelings, Iris, with some of your comments there. Others who want to, and Iris, feel free to respond to Virginie as well, but others who want to reflect or add something.
So hi, this is Kashka again.
Yes.
And I just wanted to echo some of the comments that were made. And as I said, I'm here to represent the low income sector in a sense. And I think that what was said about education and the younger generation, that's one of the key points that has to be stressed. Because for the low income sector, as far as the initiatives, they need to be made simple and they need to make sense. They need to be simple because typically people in the low income sector, their priorities are so day-to-day based. And these kinds of initiatives, while they're incredibly wonderful in scope. One, they might not, just like the other lady said, they might not even really know about them or how they could benefit, because they're just simply, whether there's a language barrier or whether it's just the fact that, again, day-to-day hardships overcome and overpower anything else that comes into view. So any kind of initiatives when it comes to people that struggle on a daily basis, it has to be something that is simple, that they can incorporate into their lives. And certainly I think education and educating the youth to have it become part of them, part of their just the process of growing up, of just knowing how things are. That's how we're going to tackle this in the long run. But anyway, that's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Yes, Beverly. Thanks, Kasha.
I just wanted to say that, when we say that things need to be simple for people, we are not saying that they are not smart enough to understand the complexities. For most marginalized people, the solution to the climate crisis is simple. They've not had a lot to do with creating it. And so for them, living day to day is simplicity in itself. And it's important to remember when we say we need to make things simple, that it's not because they may not understand it. Mm-hmm. They may understand it in ways that the white population has never, ever considered. I just wanted to add that. And I'm awfully glad to have heard Iris. It just makes my heart well with pride at our future generations. We need to start listening to these kids. And she's right. The solution to turning this crisis around is with our children. And it does begin with teaching the real history of this planet. So thank you.
Thanks, Beverly. I'm seeing a couple other hands up. I'm going to use facilitator prerogative for a second to insert myself in and say, I could not agree with you more, Beverly, on that point, is the fact that you make this stuff so complicated to participate in and to understand. We all need it to be simpler. That's not particular to low-income people or marginalized communities. We all need it to be simpler to participate. But there is something very real about also living in an environment of scarcity and your ability to cipher through fields and fields of information to get to what you need, and how challenging we can make it for folks as well. So for me, that's a point that was well taken. But I'll stop talking and I'll call on Liz. Liz, do you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I have two things. First, Iris, think you're amazing, and I want to encourage you to try and break the habit of apologizing when you speak, because there's literally nothing that an educated young woman in a leadership position has to apologize for. So I really just want to encourage you to break that habit when you talk. And then the second thing is I really just want to echo the emphasis on young people when we're talking about just transitions, because a lot of refugee families with language barriers have to rely a lot on the younger people in their families to be kind of the liaison between helping them do these things and helping them understand and those types of things. So I just hope that as a group we keep pausing to bring that perspective of young people and their opinions into our conversations. Thanks.
Great, and I think we had one more hand, and I think it's Kelly.
Hi.
Yes, thank you, Iris. That's amazing. And I also really appreciate everything everyone else has said. From my experience as a former young person myself, and from talking to we've had a lot of interns in our business who are college students, and one of the trends that I've seen is a lot of frustration because you don't have a lot of power as a young person. You don't own a house. You can't make decisions about that. A lot of people don't own a car. They can't make decisions there. Do you see that that's something that a lot of the youth that you talk to are just feeling frustrated and they don't have any way to be empowered?
Yeah, I think to some extent, I think that there are actually some great avenues right now where young people can have that voice and that impact. For example, this position. But I do think that that is something. I mean, I think that sentiment also comes from the fact that we haven't had any power in getting here. I think I might have just frozen, but we haven't contributed to this, but we know that this is exactly what we're going to have to deal with for our whole lives. So I think that might be part of that sentiment you're seeing, but also, yes, it's hard to choose to buy an electric vehicle when you are really young and maybe don't even have a choice to buy a vehicle. So
my follow-up then is, and this is sort of an open-ended, doesn't have to be answered right now, but if there are ways that we can empower youth, and maybe not to have to do something like convince your parents to also go vegan, but rather, or to buy a very expensive electric car, but maybe those simpler things. And what Liz pointed out is also feeds into what I was already thinking is, if the youth can convince their parents or even just educate their parents on, hey, here's a simple program we can use to get much more efficient water heater, and it'll be cheaper to run, and they're doing this amazing rebate or something. That kind of education to empower youth to help make sure that the older generations are aware of the opportunities out there and making a real difference. So not something to be answered, but it's just something that I was thinking about with what you were talking about, because I think that the younger generation cares a lot, because you're going to have to live with this, and everything you can do to help make it better is something I think people will want to engage in that. And so if we as a council and as a committee can help with more ideas to empower youth to make real change, I think that's something that we could be really proud of.
Great, yeah, thank you. So we're nearing the end, and I want to leave a good 5 minutes at least for public comment at the end. But Sue, you had your hand raised.
That's okay. If there's anyone else, I can certainly pass. I was just really going to share how proud and hopeful, honestly, this conversation leaves me. And I have had the opportunity to be maybe not as impressed as I am with Iris, but with many Vermont youth. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Because I just got popped out. And I feel that I love these comments, because I think even in our public engagement process, we can empower people to share their stories and their voices and their ideas. And that's what excites me about, the work that we have ahead of us now. And I couldn't agree more with everything that all of the folks have said, but that truth that really the youth are the leaders for tomorrow. And I've seen tremendous abilities of Vermont youth organizing and mobilizing for change in a variety of ways, including around climate and around racial justice. And I think that you bring tremendous voice to us, and I think we will be able to collaborate with your educators and your colleagues around the state in this process. So I think that whole empowering process is so important, because it is sort of what can help maybe transform the frustration, anger into action, and hopefully positive action. So I just wanted to share how thrilling that was and how much hope Chris and everyone here is giving me. Thanks.
Great, thank you. All right, great. And I think we will continue to just reach out to folks to invite you to bring a community listen session to our future meetings as well. So maybe start to think about what that might look like for each of us. We'll do that. And with that, I think I'm going to just, again, pause our conversation and make sure we leave some time for public comment at the end. So if there's anyone who wants to join in with some public comment, please do. Free to raise your hand or just unmute and go for it. Okay. This was another great example of how Iris made a great suggestion. We should not wait till the end of the meeting because people don't want to stick around for 2 hours. So thank you, Iris. We already saw the impact of that, switching to a midpoint comment as well. So with that, I think we'll wrap it up. And thanks everyone for another fantastic meeting. And I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.